I'm Kara Scribner, and today I'm going to be doing the Year Freakout Tag, one of my favorite tags of the year. I really enjoy talking about favorite books, and I read 135 somehow, so that means I have too many books to talk about already, and I might do videos wrapping it up if I feel well and all of that stuff. But right now we're going to jump right in, and the first one is my favorite book of the year. So as a compromise to the 20 books that I could have talked on this list that have ingrained themselves in my heart and will stay there forever, I have two books, and one nonfiction and one fiction. The first fiction is A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. This is a book that I absolutely love. It's by Betty Smith. It came out in 1943, and it's autobiographical fiction that takes place from 1900 to about 1918. And it is so dang good. It came in and it's hilarious, it's funny, it's wonderful. I really, the first bit I struggled to get in, but once I got in, I was in love. Because it really focuses on this really, screwed up family with a lot of brokenness and a lot of hurt and a lot of really bad coping mechanisms, and yet they love each other so much, and it really has a compassionate eye on, suffering and addiction. I thought that they spoke more, honestly, about a lot of risque subjects than we do in modern times, and it was just so dang good. It was also one of the funniest books I have ever read, and one of the most compelling and beautiful and lovely books I've ever read. My second book is In the Dream House, and this is by Carmen Maria Machado, and she is an incredible author that writes so well. This is her memoir about being in an abusive relationship and how that affects her, and she writes it in gothic horror. She writes it in lots of metaphors and stuff like that, which is just the way that I love. And she also talks about the paradise, because she was in a female-female relationship. A lot of people are like, well, yeah, obviously you have paradise. And what we often forget is that when there's a lot of outside stress, that often comes out in, internal stress as well. And also, just because you've got freedom and stuff like that does not mean that there isn't abusers inside that freedom. And that's something that she talks about so well. One of the most poignant quotes in this was, "Sometimes I wish she would hit me so that people would believe how bad it was." And that is so true of a lot of people who have been in abusive relationships that have not physically escalated or rarely ever physically escalate. We forget that abuse isn't just physical. Just because he or she didn't hit you does not mean that it's not abusive. There's this poignant section about Bluebeard where she talks about the fact that he abused and chained up his wives for little infractions. And the thing that we forget is that if there hadn't been that infraction, there would have been other infractions. The fact is that abuse will always happen, and that you can't just, nothing you will ever do will ever not cause, there eventually will be a buildup and there will be abuse if that person is like that. So to remember that it's not about looking at survivors and saying, why didn't you why weren't you nicer? Why weren't you kinder? Or why weren't you whatever? She would have found a reason to lash out on Carmen no matter what she did. And that's something that is very evident. It also talks a lot about how her bisexuality was used against her and was used as a reason for her to lash out and to be angry and to be all of these things, because she wanted a reason. I really struggle to talk about how much this book means, and how much, because it's so well written, it's so poignant and expressive, and talks about such a hard issue. My favorite sequel of the year is Take a Hint, Dani Brown. I absolutely adored this book. The Brown Sisters has been around for a while and people have been praising them and loving them, but this one just fell in love. I read Chloe Brown because it has fibromyalgia representation, which is something that I myself suffer from, and I did like it, but I didn't connect. Especially this one was just so beautiful. So it follows Dani Brown, who is in her PhD for women's studies and feminist literary theory. She talks a lot about really incredible Black authors. It was also really cool for me because a lot of the books that she mentioned were books that she mentioned Toni Morrison and Audre Lorde and all of these authors that I was currently reading around the same time. So it was really cool to see that, and I just related to her extreme love of academicness and school and learning, and get lost in that, and that's something that I do a lot. So I really related to Dani Brown in that, and going so hard just for something she loves and not knowing and not having the surety or the belief that people love what you're talking about. Those are things that really dug deep into my heart. And also Zaf. It's just amazing. Oh my goodness, I love him. So Zaf is a British Muslim who used to be on a really good soccer team and football team, and he was very famous, and especially for being Muslim, and his father and his brother died, and this rocked his life. So he retired really early, and he went into coaching boys and talking to them about trauma, and he has really bad anxiety. This is my favorite scene ever in a romance, is when he's having a panic attack and Danny just sits down with him and they sit on a sidewalk and talk, and like, my heart. The next question is new release you want to read and haven't yet. So this one I have definitely dropped the ball on because I've wanted to read it for 4 years, I think now. So this is Tales of the Hinterland by Melissa Albert. I loved The Hazelwood, and it was such an extraordinary novel. It doesn't get enough rep around like booktube and stuff like that, and I adore it. And I reread it last year, and then I read its sequel, and I didn't love the sequel absolutely, but rereading The Hazelwood was so good. And it's because it incorporates all of this mythology into this. So pretty much, I forget her name character, but she is a girl who has always been on the travel with her mother, and they've never like kind of stopped, and now her mother is married to this new guy that she doesn't love, and also her grandmother just died. Her grandmother was like this famous like Evelyn Hugo kind of figure with like, but also she became a recluse later on in life, and no one knows exactly the mysteries around her, but she read these like super famous, super dark like mythology and stories and fairy tales. And yeah, so we start being involved in that, and I absolutely love this story. It is so good, and I need to read. So this is the collection of the fairy tales, and I've been waiting to read them. An Emotion of Great Delight, and this is by Tahira Mafi. I really adore her as an author, and I really loved her contemporary, so I'm very excited to read her next contemporary that deals in 2003. So her first contemporary dealt with like the outcry and the Islamophobia after 9/11, and this is right after Iraq has been declared war upon by the US. What is your most anticipated book for the second half of the year? And this one I am talking about because I could have talked about it as first book in my favorites of the year, and this would be Raybearer and then Redemptor by Jordan Afiko. And this book is so extraordinary. It combines West African and European folklore into this really original story. It's by this mysterious woman who is her mother but she never sees, puts a curse on her that she has to go and befriend this guy who is going to be king, and then she has to kill him. So the secrecy around it though is the fact that he has this like council, and they actually have to like genuinely love him to be able to be accepted. Otherwise, like trying to form a connection with him won't work, because there's 12 things that kill him, and he has 11 councilmen, so that he can eventually die of old age. But like poison and fire and drowning and all these things won't work once he has the relationship with these people. They protect him. So only people in the council can kill him. So she has to become part of the council. She has to become part of the council. She has to genuinely love him, but she doesn't want to. And also it's not romantic. He's asexual, which I adore. I know that's probably a spoiler, but like I don't think sexuality should ever be a spoiler. So I have two favorite books for most surprised of the year, and the first one is Being Mortal. This is a nonfiction medical book that I would never have picked up except for one of my best friends in real life. We have been across the country doing school and haven't seen each other for a really long time, so we decided to do a book club, and she's a medical student, so we decided to pick this up, and I was like, okay, I'll read it for her, but like I don't think I'll actually like it. I really liked it. It talks a lot about aging and the way that we aren't honest with people about death, and then that causes more trauma and stuff like that. It has a lot of aspects, so it's hard to summarize, but it's really about dying and about grief and about love and family and all of these things, and also how we treat people who are like elderly, and like, you know, how like old folks homes or like senior homes or whatever you want to call them were created in order to give people community once older people stop being in the house of their children as much, and yet it is turned into something that is efficient over care, and how actually spending time investing in people and giving them a place where they feel loved and honored will actually allow people to live healthier and longer. And also when you're giving like a cancer diagnosis or something like that, it is shown that like when you're actually honest about the fact that the person might die or something, the grief and things after that work so much better than when you maybe try to just prolong someone's life in a way that is not going to work. And like actually giving people the time to grieve and actually accepting grief and death actually helps people in the mourning period, help people helps not only the family, but also the person dying to actually be able to accept that, and that death isn't necessarily something that we need to always fear. It's actually something that embracing it as a natural part of life can actually really help. Other book that really surprised me was Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. I read this in 2018, and in 2017 I heard about it and I was like, I am going to absolutely love this book. It's a satire, it's gothic, it's all of the things I love. And then I read it and I didn't love it. I think that I expected it a little bit more to be like Rebecca, which is a favorite of mine, but upon rereading it 3 years later, I actually really love it. It wasn't that well read before I started booktube. So many books that I just love so much more now that I understand them and I'm able to have a better reading comprehension of them, and Northanger Abbey is that one. It is absolutely wonderful. I love the romance in it. I love the narration. It's so sassy. It's wonderful. And now that I know a little bit more about like gothic horror as a genre, it also worked so much better. And then I also forgot that I'm also going to mention Blue Horses here because it's a recent read. I also never wanted to read poetry for the longest time, especially nature poetry. I was like, nope. And this like whole shelf is now like poetry. So yeah, I read this and I wasn't expecting to love it, but I wanted to read Mary Oliver because she's so renowned and stuff like that, and I was like, at least I'll have an understanding of it, and I loved it. It's so dang good. And by the end, I went from like the first 10 poems didn't grab me as much, so I was like, okay, whatever, yeah, like this is okay, to be like, oh my goodness, maybe we should only ever tell like the history of the world through like nature metaphors. Who is my new favorite author? For this, I have to have read multiple of their books, not in the same series. So for this, I'm going to have Carmen Maria Machado. I absolutely adored her. The In the Dream House is a new favorite, as I said. Lola Woods was also a new favorite. It is one of the few books that I've done a review on because I absolutely adored it, about sexual abuse and how sexual abuse breaks apart families and breaks apart cultures and communities and all of those things. It is so well written, and it's also in a way that isn't re-traumatizing, which is super great, and as a graphic novel, and the art is wonderful. And then I also read Her Body and Other Stories, which I didn't absolutely love. I did enjoy some of them, but it's her first work, and I think that I could see a lot of it in the shards of the things that I will come to love and that I love so much about her other two books. So I'm so excited for her to read and to write more books because 2 of her books are absolutely favorites. And then Vivek Shaya, I haven't read as many of her books, but I read 2 of them. I'm Afraid of Men, which is a nonfiction book about her trans journey and the experience of misogyny when she was presenting as a man, and also later as a trans woman and as a woman in general. And it's so good and it's so relatable and I love it. And then She of the Mountains is this book that incorporates mostly contemporary but also incorporates Hindu mythology into the story of coming out and growing up and stuff like that in the 90s and early 2000s, and it's so well done. You have a story in which this boy is being told from the time he doesn't even understand the word. It's also an immigrant Indian story as well, and about that he's gay and he's gay and gay, and then he's like, okay, sure, whatever, I don't know what this means, and he's like happy, and then he like starts being like sad and all of these things because he's like 10, and then he grows up and he's like starts pursuing male relationships and he's like, oh, this is wonderful, and then in college he gets into a relationship with a woman and everyone's like, you know, you're just giving into the heteronormity and stuff like that. And it's a story about coming out as bi, and but it's also a story about like coming out. I adore it because in both books she talks about the fact that like people just assume that because you're queer that you're wanting to hook up with people. Experiences can be very different, and some people will see that as freedom to be able to express like sex positivity, and some people will be like, yeah, I can be sex positive and also not want to hook up with people. And I really enjoyed that and just the experience of that. And then at the end of, you know, a lot of the experience in both of them kind of refrain about the idea of that you need to accept yourself. There's this beautiful thing at the end of She of the Mountains that says, I like my body when I'm with you, but I want to like my body when I'm not with you too. Newest fictional crush has to be Zap from Take a Hint of Danny Brown. It's such a lovely story and I adore him. I love his representation of his anxiety about the fact that he cares so much, that he loves romance and he loves happy endings and all of these things. He's like a cinnamon roll and he's adorable and wonderful. Newest fictional character, I have Nina Riva from Malibu Rising. I just finished it last night and I really love her stories, and I think Taylor Jenkins Reid could be a favorite author as well somehow in the future as well. Even though she doesn't read what I would typically go for, I really like her work. She's the oldest daughter of Mick Riva, and her mother has a tumultuous relationship with her father, and she is later orphaned and has to take in her younger siblings and raise them, and she has to be really strong, and she has to give a lot of herself to other people, and that's something that I can relate a lot to, and something that I always love seeing characters in that and seeing them. Then we also have Affy from His Only Wife. This was one of my first books of the year, and it almost made the favorite list as well. Like, it is definitely favorites, but it almost made like top favorite. It's about a girl that is Nigerian, and she lives in a small town in Nigeria in contemporary time, and her auntie, who is non-related to her, gets her to marry her son, and he's not even there. Like, she marries him in absence, and then goes to Lagos, the capital, and sits there and waits for him. And pretty much the backstory of this is that he's been sleeping with this woman from another town, another country, who his mother does not like, and pretty much they're like, we need this sweet, lovely woman to marry my son and make him straighten up. And yeah, she's like super controlling and like all of these things, and she has to really like, you know, not his only wife, like she's a second wife to this guy, and it's all of these dynamics, things like we really just have her experience, and we live her experience of this, and like wanting to not realize that she's like really giving into a lot of like terrible gender norms and stuff like that, that she wants to be submissive and that she wants to be perfect and lovely just so that she can win over this guy, because her mother's like livelihood and safety is dependent on her mother-in-law now. And it's like all of these things, and it's so well executed. I really love Affy's character development, and it's not where I thought it would go, and even until like the last pages I wasn't sure exactly where she was going to go and what it was going to happen, but like Medzi is such a great author, and this was such a great book, and she was such a great story, and like she was such a great character. I just really adored the story. So every once in a while people are like, I just don't cry when I read, or like any of the things, like a book has never made me cry, and I'm like, that's great for you. I cry through most books. Like, even books that I don't like, I cry in often. Like, I don't know, I'm just a little bit of an emotional sap, especially when it comes to fiction. And so I have 3 books that like made me like really cry. The first one is The Mothers. This was my first book of the year, and if you watch my first vlog of the year, I'm just like literally sobbing. It is about these 2 friends, and it deals a lot with like grief and loss and abuse and church dynamics and relationship dynamics, and what does mother mean, and what does motherhood mean, what does not being a mother mean, what are these choices. And it's just such a great book. A lot of people have read The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett, and The Mothers is so good as well, and I just really recommend it. It's beautiful written, it's beautiful character developments, very flawed characters that don't end in a way that you want. Like, I appreciate that in both of them it doesn't have a perfect ending, but it's such an emotional ending, and also the characters, even when they're making horrendous things, you still love them. We also have Butter, Honey, Pig Bread, and this is so good. This was a recent read, and it became an immediate favorite. It deals with 2 sisters, and they have something traumatic happen in their childhood, and this makes them separate, and they are twins and haven't seen each other in like 20-ish or like 15 years-ish at the beginning of this book. And it also has stories of their mother, Kamarachi, and we have her in third person and them in first, and that is also part of the story, which is super cool to see. And it's just so well written, and it's one of those stories that doesn't really have a plot as much. It's really about them living their lives, and those are stories that I love. Like, we have the events that are traumatic, we have the events that happen, but mostly we just see their life stories, and it's so dang good. And I definitely choked up many places in it. We also have Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney, and I read this book twice back to back, and I sobbed. It is the first book that I've ever read with endometriosis representation, and I don't have endometriosis, but I have PCOS, which is another internal female organs disease that causes a lot of pain in periods, that causes a lot of infertility and all of these things. And this isn't something that's referenced in like the making of this book a lot, and we don't even know what's going on in her life at the time, but when it hit and that's what's happening, I started sobbing so much, and like I can feel the tears behind my eyes right now just thinking about that, and that representation and that shame, and the way that she can't express about the fact that even if she didn't want to have children, that that even if she didn't want to have children, that the ability to not have children and what that means for a woman and what that means for her, and like she's also a poet and she's doing all of these things and has so much insecurities and she's so dang flawed, but like, oh, I love the story so much and I love the characters in their all their flawed glory and the writing and everything, and it really means a lot to me as a book. To have the direct opposite, we're going to talk about books that made me happy, and Heartstopper by Alice Oseman. I've been hearing about this for so dang long, and I'm so glad that I finally read it. It is so sweet and wonderful. It is about these two boys falling in love at like a boarding school, all boys school, and it's like about coming out and all of these things. And I have been like I've been like going to my library and being like, please give me the third one, the fourth one. Also, These Violent Delights also made me very happy in a very different way. I love Romeo and Juliet and I love Shakespeare, and I loved reliving this and in the Jazz Age and in Shanghai and enjoying Asian culture and Chinese culture, and like it's just so well done and it made me so happy throughout to experience this story. And very different from the Heartstopper, but I enjoyed both of them. The most beautiful book that you have read this year, and this has to be In the Dream House. It's so gorgeous. Like, look at that cover, look at her peeking out of it. It has like that mad wife in the attic and like how we downplay women's role and like all of those things. It's so gorgeous and wonderful, and I really enjoy it as a cover. So then we have books that we have to read by the end of the year, and there's a lot. So we have White Sargo Sea by Jean Rhys. We have Mansfield Park by, I was gonna say Jane Eyre, by Jane Austen. We have Cleopatra, which I've been reading with Kara for a very long time and haven't finished, even though it's so dang good. We have Tenet of Wildfell Hill, because I really want to read more Bronte sisters. We have and then we have If We Come Softly by Jacqueline Woodson, because I really adore Jacqueline Woodson. So happy reading and writing, and I hope that you really enjoyed this and that you had a great time, and I will see you next time.